It is one of the most horrific cases we have ever covered here on Sidebar. An Oklahoma youth baseball coach caught sexually assaulting a child. And now the victim and her family, they're getting some justice, and a child rapist may be locked away forever. Renowned predator catcher Chris Hansen joins me to help analyze this truly disturbing case. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. So we first told you about this case here on Sidebar back in January, and that is when Donovan Sheppard was arrested for raping the daughter of the woman that he had been living with. Let's process that for a second. Well, now he has pled guilty to these heinous crimes. And Sheppard, if you recall, was a coach for the youth baseball team Oklahoma Aftermath. He was apparently out at a bar in Moore, Oklahoma. He allegedly got into a fight, and police say a woman that he was living with came to pick him up and took him to Oklahoma City. But while she went to bed, he apparently didn't. No, she went looking for him, and what does she find? She finds him raping her 12-year-old daughter. She actually held him at gunpoint until the police got there. And if that wasn't bad enough, when Sheppard was arrested, police say both Sheppard and this woman told them Sheppard was HIV positive. Now, the victim told police this wasn't even the first time he sexually abused her, that Sheppard had attacked her 6 different times, even on her 12th birthday. So Sheppard, he was arrested, charged, long list of crimes: rape, lewd molestation, exposing others to AIDS. Sheppard was supposed to have a preliminary hearing in this case where the prosecution would present their evidence to see if there's enough to be bound over for trial. It was supposed to happen last week, but instead, according to the court records, Sheppard entered a guilty plea to a total of 8 counts. And according to the court website, it appears he was sentenced to life in prison plus an additional 62 years, but also with the possibility of parole after he does 35 years. We believe he's 40 years old right now. And he also has to pay court costs and put money into the victim's compensation fund. Hey, I want to quickly thank Upside for sponsoring this episode of Sidebar. So Upside is a free app that gets you cash back on daily essentials like gas and groceries. So when I pump my gas, and yes, I pump my own gas, when I do, I can use the free Upside app. I mean, why not get cash back when you fill up your tank, right? And yes, this is actual real cash back. It's money that appears in your Upside app that you can then transfer straight into your bank account. So once you have the Upside app, you claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside, you pay as usual using a debit or credit card, you follow the steps on the app, and you get paid. And as you saw me just do, you can use Upside at places like Shell, Exxon, Mobil, 7-Eleven, Taco Bell. There's a lot more. To find out how much you can earn, you click the link in the description to download Upside, or you scan the QR code on screen, and you use our promo code SIDEBAR, and you'll get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. That's promo code SIDEBAR for an extra 25 cents back on your first gallon of gas. I want to bring in right now renowned journalist, predator catcher Chris Hansen, host of Takedown on TruBlu.com and also the podcast of Predators I've Caught. Chris, so good to see you again. You and I actually talked about this case back in January.
We sure did. And talk about heinous. I mean, this is the very definition of a predator, Jesse. And as you know, Oklahoma is one of the states that has a law where knowingly exposing another human to HIV is an additional crime here. So that's one of the 8 counts to which he pleaded guilty. But who does this? A monster does this. And, you know, I remember a few years back having a conversation with Polk County, Florida Sheriff Grady Judd. And he runs the sheriff's office there, and that's one of the agencies with which we do our sting operations around the country.
By the way, for people who don't know, he's awesome. Like,
yeah, he's the best.
Character.
He's the best. I've known him for 40 years since he was a lieutenant, and I worked down in Florida. And his position is, in these extreme cases, these guys should be opposed to should be, you know, potentially given the death penalty. And when he first said it, and I love Grady, and I've known Grady, as I mentioned, for many, many years, and he's a big thinker. And I was a little surprised to hear him say that you know, the death penalty for a predator. But, you know, I'm starting to think in a case like this, I'm not opposed to that. You know, I mean, you got a guy here who, you know, repeatedly molested this poor child in the most, you know, graphic and violent way, and exposes the child to HIV And then to find out that the mother knew something about this in the past and apparently didn't report it until she caught him on this occasion and held him at gunpoint. There's a special place for a criminal like this. And I don't think the death penalty would be going too far, quite honestly.
It's interesting you say that because, the death penalty we have in place for if you're going to take a life, then there should be a life in exchange, right? It's the ultimate punishment. And I would say to you, we talk about these kinds of cases all the time, the effect that sexual abuse has on these people's lives. But when you expose somebody as well to a potentially fatal disease, that's a real problem as well. And that's why, I'm not going to give my 2 cents on whether or not the death penalty should be warranted there, but I'll tell you, I understand why he says it, particularly in a case as egregious as this.
That's my point. We are very careful in society, about the death penalty, as we should be, because you don't want to make any mistakes there, obviously. But for a guy like this, you have to wonder about that. We just finished an investigation a week or so ago, and the episode will be on this week on watchtrueblu.com on our streaming crime network. And we caught a man who was a police officer for 20 years, both in Michigan and in Florida. His current job is working in security at a school for the deaf in Michigan. And here he is trying to meet a teenage girl after a very graphic conversation. We watch him walk in. He locks both locks on the door, and he scoots right in on the decoy, posing as a child. And I walk on and confront him, and he admits the whole thing. Yeah. That's offensive. That guy should go to prison. You have to wonder about what he's done in his past as a law enforcement officer. But in this case in Oklahoma, you have to wonder what this guy has done in his past. And obviously they've looked into that, and you wonder, did that have anything to do with him, taking this plea pretty much on the nose and not going to trial?
Well, yeah, I think it would have been a very tough case for him to defend. Do you see this often? Someone who's living with someone else, and whether the abuse happens to a stepchild or the child of a boyfriend and girlfriend, they insert themselves into that kind of situation. Do you see this happening a lot?
Yeah, it's a common predator tactic. The reality is alarming as the predators we catch are, those cases. The vast majority of child assaults, sexual assaults, and molestations take place with somebody they know. A family friend, a relative, a stepfather. And so, those make up the vast majority of these cases across the country.
Does the fact that he raped this girl, she was so young, and on her 12th birthday, we cover these cases all the time. What are some of the ways this happens? What are some of the reasons you've heard predators justify this behavior?
Well, I think some of them will say that they were themselves molested as a child, and they're acting out because they normalize this behavior. Obviously, the potential of a substance abuse problem weighs in on it, doesn't justify it, but it clouds the judgment and the control of one's actions. But I've always said, Jesse, and you know this, these guys fall into 3 different categories: the opportunist, a guy who's just addicted to this fantasy, and a stone cold predator. And this guy, in this case, in Oklahoma, fits into that category. He is a bad guy. And I'd be willing to go out on a ledge here and say that this isn't the first time he's assaulted a child.
And especially inserting himself as a youth baseball coach. What impact does this, that's the part too, right? When you think about that, right. You talk about ingratiating themselves in that kind of environment. Talking about this young girl though, what impact does this have on a child for the rest of her life?
Well, I've talked to, dozens and dozens of therapists and psychiatrists over the years posing that same question, so I can understand the damage here. But it's incalculable. Imagine being 12, and before you're even able to process an intimate relationship, before you're even legally able to give consent, this is forced upon you. And it's forced upon you in the home of your mother, the one person you trust to protect you. And if it's true that it happened before and she looked the other way, that damage is horrific and could last a lifetime. And is this girl going to get the kind of treatment and therapy she needs to get through this and to make some sense of it? And to, you hope it's one of those cases where, you don't want it to happen to anybody, but you hope it's one of those cases where the person says, okay, I can get past this at some point, and then becomes a therapist or a law enforcement officer and tries to make sure this doesn't happen to another girl. And I've seen this. And these are amazing, brave people who go out there who've been victimized. I mean, look at Elizabeth Smart. Look at the absolute horror and terror she endured for 18 months? And to come out on the other end as this poised, incredible young woman, mother, wife, and activist that she is, that's amazing. And not everybody can do that, but you have to hope at least that something good can come out of it, because, this poor girl has been victimized in the most acute way.
And let's talk about the parent here, because again, we don't know the full extent of her knowledge about what was happening to her child, but in general, somebody, and sometimes it's not that extreme where they have the opportunity to hold the perpetrator by gunpoint, but the parents of the children who are abused, I imagine they take on some of they have a sense of guilt, right? And they take on some of the blame. How does
you'd have to believe they would. I mean, look, whatever happened prior to this incident, the mother took action here, held him accountable, held the gun, and had every right to do so, and made sure that he was arrested and prosecuted. Now, what happened before then, we don't know for sure. There are reports that this wasn't the first time. Having said that, she took action, and you can only hope and pray that, this little girl gets the help that she needs to cope with this, because it's the most tragic thing I can imagine is the victimization of a child. And that's why we continue to do these predator investigations, the takedown shows on TruBlu, and guys continue to show up. So I don't think that's changing anytime soon. And you hope that you can have an impact by holding these guys accountable when you can, before they actually attack a child, and you create awareness in a dialogue where parents are vigilant and have an open conversation with their kids to say, look, these guys are out there. And it's not just on the dark web, it's on the common social media platforms our kids are exposed to on a daily basis.
Now, as I mentioned in the court record, our understanding is it seems very unlikely that, but it's possible that he could get out of prison one day. But generally speaking, predators that commit these kinds of crimes, they go to prison. Are they rehabilitated when they come out, or even while they're still in prison? Do they ever rehabilitate? Do they ever recognize what they did? Do they ever understand the error of their ways? Talk to me about that.
Some claim that they're better, that they can survive in the outside world. More often than not, in my experience, there is an opportunity to reoffend. And look, this isn't a simple issue, and there's not a simple answer. And these guys are not all the same personality trait, character trait, criminal mind. You've got guys who are on the young end of the age scale, who are opportunists, socially inept. They use the internet to fulfill a fantasy, try to meet a girl, and in their mind, it's Romeo and Juliet. A lot of those cases, and I've seen them, and we go back on the podcast, Predators I've Caught, and revisit these cases. Some of those guys take their punishment, take their monitoring, get their treatment, and they never reoffend. They're the hardcore heavy hitters like this guy. Lock them up forever. That's the end of it. You can't fix them. And there are these guys in the middle who are the most difficult cases, because they are everyday mainstream guys, doctors, they're businessmen, they're guys. Some people in our business have gotten caught up in this, and they have this fantasy of being sexually with an underage child, a boy or girl, and they know there's a 20% chance of getting caught, just like there's a 20% chance of having fentanyl in your heroin and dying of an overdose. But they do it anyway because they have this need to fulfill this fantasy. And for whatever combination of reasons, they can't control it, and they show up in our investigations, and we see it all the time. So that middle area is the most vexing to me, at least. And again, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I just have come face to face with 500 or 600 of these guys, and that's my experience, and along with having talked to people who are expert in this field. But I can tell you the other thing that's in play here is when you talk to a psychiatrist with the U.S. Marshal Service, for instance, who goes into prisons and talks to these guys in an environment where they have nothing to lose by being honest, those psychiatrists would tell you that without exception, there is a connection between viewing child porn and offending in virtually every case. And so that's why we treat the possession, distribution, and creation of child porn so seriously. And that's why the sentences are so severe, is because every time that one of those pictures or images is made, it's the violation of a child, and it's a continued violation every time somebody views an image like that.
Pretty sick stuff, as always. You know, we talk about with this, but you know,
well, thank God he was caught. You know, thank God the mother did
he's caught.
The right thing, and it's a horrible tragedy that this 12-year-old child, 12-year-old at least at the time of the offense, has to deal with it. We can only hope for the best for her, and that you know, she gets the help and guidance she needs.
And let me say this, you know, he pled guilty. This doesn't go to trial. She doesn't have to relive that experience. And so that's a good thing as well, but he's locked up. Chris Hansen, thank you so much for coming on.
Jesse, thank you anytime.
You got it. You can take a look at Takedown on TruBlu. Also the podcast, Predators I've Caught, with Chris Hansen. Chris, always appreciate your time. So good seeing you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jesse. See you soon.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.